Giordano Bruno was not a man of moderation. He was not content to interpret the world as it was, nor to conform to the categories of thought that framed the universe in familiar, ordered limits. He sought the infinito. He became one of history's most incendiary martyrs of thought. His was a life lived in flight. From the cloisters of Naples to the courts of European nobility, from the classrooms of heretical speculation to the Inquisition's dungeon. But if he fled the authorities of his time, he never fled from his vision, a vision so radical, so metaphysically unbounded, that the world was not yet ready to look into it. Born in 1548 in the small Italian town of Nola near Naples, Filippo Bruno entered the Dominican order at age 15. There he took the name Giordano. In the cloisters of the monastery of San Domenico Maggiore, he studied Aristotelian philosophy, theology, and classical texts, but already his appetite for forbidden knowledge was apparent. He was discovered in possession of banned books, including works by Erasmus. He removed images of the Virgin and the saints from his cell, and before long he was forced to flee. It would be the first of many flights. Bruno would spend the rest of his life wandering across Europe: Geneva, Paris, London, Wittenberg, Prague, Helmstedt, Frankfurt, Venice, and finally Rome, his final destination, his fatal destination. Unlike Galileo, Bruno was not a scientist in the modern sense. His persecution was not for empirical demonstration, but for cosmological heresy, for metaphysics on fire. His cosmology was not merely about celestial mechanics. It was an assault on the theological architecture of the world. In Dell'Infinito, Universo e Mondi, on the Infinite Universe and Worlds, published in 1584 in London, Bruno writes, "We declare that there are infinite worlds in the infinite universe, none at the center, none at the periphery. All stars are suns, each with their own worlds, and all partake in one infinite nature." Bruno, 1584. To the scholastic mind of the 16th century, this was not merely incorrect, it was cosmological blasphemy. Bruno had dismantled the great vertical order of creation, the earth at the center, then the fixed stars, then the empyrean heaven, then God above all. In Bruno's universe, there is no center. All points are equidistant from infinity. And in such a universe, what becomes of the Christian narrative of fall and redemption? What becomes of the incarnation, if there are other worlds, perhaps with other beings who've never known the Garden of Eden? This is not idle speculation. These were the questions that terrified the Church. As the Dominican inquisitors in Rome would later record in their summaries of his trial, Bruno was accused of holding that the universe is eternal, that it contains innumerable worlds like our own, that Christ was not the only incarnation, that magic is a true natural science, and that the soul transmigrates. Firpo, Il Processo di Giordano Bruno, 1993. Each of these beliefs constituted, in the eyes of the Roman Inquisition, a direct threat not only to theological dogma but to the moral and ontological order of Christian Europe. But Bruno was not merely a heretic in belief. He was a heretic in temperament, fiery, unyielding, sharp-tongued. His writings are dense with satire, allegory, and scathing invective. In The Expulsion of the Triumphant Beast, a dialogical and mythological treatise, he imagines a purging of the heavens of the corrupt virtues, an allegory aimed, unmistakably, at the theologians and philosophers of his day. He despised hypocrisy. He condemned the Aristotelian orthodoxy that dominated universities, mocking its inability to explain the new intuitions arising from Copernican cosmology and Hermetic mysticism, and he attacked the Church for confusing piety with intellectual submission. "The divine light is always in man," he writes, "present even if unacknowledged, and it reveals itself not by force, but by intuition." Bruno, Spaccio della Bestia Trionfante, 1584. Giordano Bruno's thought was deeply informed by the philosophical traditions of Neoplatonism and Hermeticism. He read the Corpus Hermeticum and absorbed its view of the cosmos as a living, divine organism, a view in which God is not a transcendent sovereign, but an immanent fire coursing through all things. In this, he prefigures later pantheistic thinkers like Spinoza. Frances Yates, in her seminal study, Giordano Bruno and the Hermetic Tradition, argues that Bruno's radical cosmology cannot be understood apart from this esoteric revival. Yates writes, "It is a Hermetic-infused Neoplatonism, not Copernicanism alone, which underpins Bruno's infinite universe, a cosmos where the magician philosopher participates in the divine unfolding of nature." Yeats, 1964, p. 225. Indeed, Bruno never contented himself with the physical mechanics of the stars. He sought to unveil their metaphysical grammar. Every star, in his view, was not only a sun, but a center of divine emanation. There were no inert spheres in his universe. It was a boundless ocean of spirit and motion, an infinite world of infinite worlds. But what made Bruno truly dangerous was not just his cosmology. It was the implication that truth is not contained within a closed system, that the Church does not have a monopoly on the infinite, that the human mind, through imagination, reason, and a kind of mystical daring, can reach into the deep. It is no accident that Bruno had to Rome. He fled Geneva after criticizing Calvinist dogmatism, accusing the Protestants of merely replacing one tyranny with another. In Paris, he found fleeting favor at court but made enemies in the university. In Oxford, he lectured on Copernican theory and Hermetic thought, and was mocked by Anglican scholars. His lectures were not dry treatises. They were performances of intellectual rebellion. He was theatrical, ironic, and intellectually merciless. He made more enemies than allies. One of his few stable intellectual companions was the art of memory. Bruno developed complex systems of mnemonic wheels and symbolic diagrams, not merely as aids for recollection, but as tools to align the soul with cosmic structure. In works like De Umbris Idearum, On the Shadows of Ideas, he fuses Platonic idealism with magical symbolism, creating a kind of spiritual technology. Hilary Gaddy notes that Bruno saw the imagination as a faculty not lower than reason, but a parallel vehicle of access to metaphysical insight. Gaddy, Giordano Bruno and Renaissance Science, 1999, p. 73. Eventually, Bruno returned to Venice in 1591 under the false hope of protection by the nobleman Giovanni Mocenigo. But Mocenigo, fearing Bruno's influence and suspicious of his beliefs, denounced him to the Venetian Inquisition. Bruno was arrested. His extradition to Rome followed. The trial would last 7 years of interrogation, surveillance, theological debate. The Church sought a recantation, but Bruno would not bend. The records of the trial, much of which survives in summaries, show that the Inquisition was not only concerned with his theology, but with the threat of his ideas as a kind of virus. Bruno was accused of saying that Moses performed his miracles through magic, that the devil could be saved, and that Christ was an unusually skillful magician. Firpo, 1993. These were not throwaway provocations. They were statements designed to upend the sacred and deflate the divine monopoly of the Church. He was formally condemned on February 8, 1600. His sentence, death by fire. According to eyewitness accounts, including that of Kaspar Schappa, Bruno responded to the pronouncement with cold defiance. You may pronounce this sentence against me with greater fear than I receive it. On February 17, in the Campo de' Fiori in Rome, Bruno was stripped, gagged, and burned alive. He died with his eyes open. Centuries later, the image of Bruno would return, not as a heretic, but as a prophet. Ernst Cassirer, in The Individual in the Cosmos in Renaissance Philosophy, saw in Bruno a figure of transition. Bruno did not merely anticipate the scientific worldview. He enacted the Renaissance revolt against closed systems, metaphysical, theological, or scientific, and insisted on a universe open to the play of human mind and cosmic plurality. Cassirer, 1927-1963, p. 126. More than a martyr of science, Bruno became the prototype of the intellectual martyr, not dying for data, but for an idea, the idea of the infinite, for the right to imagine beyond permitted boundaries, for the freedom to see the divine in all things, not only in the confines of Scripture. In 1889, a statue of Giordano Bruno was erected in the very square where he was burned. The base reads, "To Bruno, from the century he foresaw." The Vatican would not formally reconsider his case until 1992, and even then, no rehabilitation was offered, only regret. A footnote in history haunted by his flame. And yet Bruno persists, invoked by philosophers, scientists, poets, and heretics alike. Jorge Luis Borges, whose metaphysical fiction echoes many of Bruno's infinite labyrinths, once wrote that the universe may be infinite, but in Bruno's eyes, the infinite was not merely size, it was freedom. Borges' Other Inquisitions, 1952. In Bruno, we find the modern rebel intellectual, Prometheus, who steals not fire but the stars themselves. He challenges not only orthodoxy, but the the very idea that orthodoxy can ever contain truth. His martyrdom was not accidental. It was the necessary cost of thinking toward the absolute. What does it mean to influence a world that once burned you to silence? For Giordano Bruno, this was not a tragedy, but a metaphysical condition. His death in 1600 was not the end of his philosophy, but the beginning of his afterlife in thought. Though he left no school, no disciples, and no institutional legacy, Bruno became one of the most potent ghosts in the modern imagination. A martyr not just of cosmology, but of freedom, of vision, of the infinite itself. Bruno's influence is paradoxical. He was neither a scientist in the Newtonian sense, nor a theologian with a coherent system. His writings are obscure, scattered, and often deliberately enigmatic. And yet, his ideas keep resurfacing in literature, in philosophy, in politics, in spiritual rebellion. To understand why, we must first realize that Bruno represents not a doctrine, but a gesture, the refusal to allow any system, religious, scientific, or political, to claim finality over truth. He is the philosopher of the unfinished, the eternal opener of doors, and for that reason he has become a point of convergence for radical thinkers across centuries. The prophetic dimension of Bruno is essential to understanding his place in the intellectual canon. He was not content to merely critique. He announced, he warned, he proclaimed. His tone was not the cautious dialectic of a philosopher, but the visionary cadence of a seer. Like Nietzsche, who would later proclaim the death of God and cry out for a revaluation of all values, Bruno dismantled the inherited categories of his age and offered no safety net. He believed, deeply, that to think the infinite required courage and sacrifice. Nietzsche himself, though never formally a student of Bruno, mirrors many of Bruno's provocations. Both thinkers challenged the dualism of good and evil. Both were accused of blasphemy. Both saw in the human will a divine spark, capable of transfiguring the world. Bruno's doctrine of the heroic furor, a concept from his Heresy Furori, evokes Nietzsche's Übermensch, a figure who does not submit to tradition but burns with inner intensity, shaping new meanings from chaos. In Bruno's words, the divine is not far from us. We are ourselves its mirror, its flame, its unfolding. This immanent divinity, this refusal of distance between God and man, is echoed in Spinoza's pantheism, in Goethe's romantic nature philosophy, and in the modern rejection of transcendental authoritarianism. But Bruno is not only the ancestor of secular modernity, he is also its conscience. In an era increasingly defined by mechanization, by digital abstraction, by bureaucratized reason, Bruno's vision of a living, infinite cosmos stands as a rebuke to reductionism. He reminds us that thought, to be free, must also be dangerous, that systems of knowledge, however precise, cannot replace wonder. In this way, Bruno can be read alongside mystics and sages, figures like Meister Eckhart, who declared that the eye with which I see God is the same eye with which God sees me, or Jalal ad-Din Rumi, who wrote, "You were born with wings, why prefer to crawl through life?" These are not scientific insights, they are existential revelations. And Bruno's thought, for all its cosmological scaffolding, is ultimately aimed at the liberation of the soul. To that end, he resembles not only thinkers, but prophets, figures who stand outside society, are persecuted for their vision, and die without compromise. He is a Socrates, refusing to escape exile because the truth must face its consequences. He is a John the Baptist, crying in the wilderness of intellectual timidity. He is a martyr, not for a religion, but for the principle that any system that closes the human mind is an affront to the cosmos itself. What then does martyrdom mean in this context? We often imagine martyrs as passive victims, saintly figures who suffer nobly for their faith. Bruno challenges that notion. His martyrdom is not passive, it is chosen. He had years in prison to recant. He could have performed submission. Instead, he remained silent, then defiant. When he died, it was not for what he believed, but for refusing to stop believing. This makes him a proto-modern martyr, not one who dies for dogma, but one who dies because no dogma could contain him. It is this kind of martyrdom that reappears again and again in modernity. We see it in Galileo, forced to deny his observations, in Hypatia of Alexandria, murdered for teaching Neoplatonism under a rising Christian tide, in Emile Zola, exiled for speaking truth in the Dreyfus Affair, in Sophie Scholl, executed for opposing Hitler's regime with leaflets of conscience. In each case, the martyr is not merely a victim, they are a flare against the dark. Bruno's story also complicates our understanding of prophethood. Unlike religious prophets who speak on behalf of divine command, Bruno speaks on behalf of a vision. He does not claim revelation in the traditional sense. He claims insight, a philosophical seeing, not a scriptural hearing. In this, he bridges two roles, the philosopher who seeks wisdom and the prophet who announces it. His prophethood is not validated by miracle or institutional authority. It is validated by fire, not divine fire, but human, the fire that burns the body but not the mind, the fire that erases a man in the moment but inscribes him forever in the annals of freedom. Bruno's modern relevance also lies in the way his fate speaks to the enduring conflict between truth and power. The institutions that executed him, the Roman Inquisition, the church hierarchy, believed they were protecting truth. But as Hannah Arendt would later observe in The Origins of Totalitarianism, power often disguises itself as truth to enforce obedience. Bruno saw through this mask. He understood that the most dangerous heresy was not denying doctrine, but claiming the right to think without it. In an age increasingly defined by information control, surveillance, ideological conformity, Bruno's voice returns, not as a set of doctrines, but as a question. Are we still willing to suffer for truth or only for comfort? This is why Bruno cannot be buried in history. He is not a relic of pre-scientific mysticism. He is the eternal reminder that thought, if it is to matter, must cost something. That heresy is often just the future, for it is spoken too early. That the infinite is not merely out there among the stars, but in here within the soul, daring to imagine what lies beyond the limits of sanctioned thought. In a universe that is infinite, Bruno reminds us, nothing, no church, no empire, no orthodoxy gets to be the final word. And that, perhaps, is the most heretical claim of all.